Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we have a somewhat longer question, but I do think it's a very interesting one that leads to an equally interesting discussion. And so to get right to it, it comes to us from the Semnate, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think the Ahsoka show would be considered good if it was divorced from the Star Wars brand? I think that without the brand name, it would not receive even half the praise it gets. My rationale is as follows. The stakes feel non-existent. Every attack directed at a hero gets flawlessly deflected by either a lightsaber or, in Sabine's case, her Beskar armor or gut. The first gunfight between Sabine and the bandits in the last episode felt so one-sided, since even when the bandits got an accurate shot in, the Beskar plot armor just bounced it off. The one time where Ahsoka does get defeated, a lightsaber doesn't so much as cut her. Another issue is with the heroes. Some memorable heroes like Luke Skywalker, Titus Polo from HBO Rome, rest in peace Ray Stevenson, and Dick Winters from Band of Brothers were all united in one way. They were willing actors in their own stories, guided by adventure lust, brotherly love, and a sense of duty respectively, and acted accordingly. By comparison, Rosario's acting has been incredibly wooden. Her stoicism comes across as complete emotional disengagement, which is not what you want from a main character. After all, if the hero acts like she doesn't care half the time, why should we? Finally, and I do apologize for the lengthy rant, I am trying to be concise as best I can. The villain, Thrawn. Why should we consider him a threat? If we take the show by itself, he's a guy who was hyped up to be a mastermind, but has blundered horrendously in his first showing by losing around 10 soldiers in a failed mission which could have been easily accomplished by sending out a TIE or two to do a few strafing runs. Even if we do take his earlier appearances in Rebels, he's the guy that lost almost every single engagement he was in. Again, I ask, why are we to assume he is an existential threat? I get there's only so much you can do with 8 episodes. To me, though, the show just feels like a carrot on a stick, except there is no carrot. Okay, so I'm going to start here by bringing up Andor, which may seem off-topic or unrelated to the comment, but trust me, it very much is. Anyway, I think one of the reasons why some fans absolutely love Andor is that they didn't try to make it Star Wars. It simply used Star Wars as a setting, not as the sort of main attraction, if you will. Basically, Andor told the story it wanted to tell, and in a manner of speaking, it just so happened to work extremely well as a Star Wars show. There was already just this Empire-Rebellion dynamic in place that the show used as a basis, and then explored it. Though even without prior knowledge of it or of anything Star Wars, a non-fan could have sat down and got virtually the same thing out of Andor that a Star Wars fan did, because it wasn't all about Star Wars. Which isn't to say it did nothing to further the lore or added nothing to the larger story. I've argued many times before that what Andor did incredibly well is finally show the brutality of the Empire. It shows just how bad life under their rule actually was. We now understand why there were those who would give up everything and anything to fight and die for the rebellion, why a character like Luthen Rael exists, for example. But as good as I'd argue Andor was for Star Wars, it didn't actually need Star Wars to be good. It could have been set in a different franchise altogether, or been its own thing entirely, and it would have worked pretty much equally as well as it did for Star Wars because the story itself was just that sound. It didn't really rely on Star Wars to sell it. Which is then kind of why I think some fans did not like the show, because, as I've seen many even say, to them it didn't feel enough like Star Wars. Which in a way I do agree with, because again, it didn't really try to feel like Star Wars, or to include some of the things that we may have come to expect in Star Wars. There were no random C-3PO appearances, for example. It just was what it was. Again, Star Wars was not the main attraction when it came to Andor. While with the Ahsoka series, Star Wars itself is indeed the main attraction. A big part of the reason many are watching it, which isn't to say it's awful otherwise or anything like that, but a big part of the reason is because it's Star Wars, and if it wasn't, I think a lot of them would have, well, never tuned into it in the first place, but they would have tuned it out somewhere along the way. And if you, shall we say, removed the Star Wars from it altogether, if this were a brand new series not based on anything previously known, I don't think, or actually I should say I know, that not everything is going to hold up the same way. For example, Thrawn, who was brought up in the comment, there are many fans out there who are, in a way, kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt right now, or even making kind of excuses for him, because it is Thrawn, because of who he is, because of what we know of him from elsewhere. In other words, the show maybe didn't have to try as hard to sell him as it would have, as this huge threat. if this were a brand new show introducing a brand new character, a brand new, never-before-seen villain or antagonist. Andor, however, didn't do anything like that. It doesn't rest on its laurels, shall we say, or use what the audience already knows as this type of excuse or story shortcut. Beyond, yes, us fans knowing the Empire are the bad guys and that they should be feared, but as I pointed out moments ago, it actually made the Empire terrifying, more so than it had been before, I'd argue, other than with a handful of characters like Vader and Palpatine. And so in Andor, because of how frightening they are, there is plenty of tension around the Empire, and even a single TIE fighter felt like a massive threat or something to be feared by our heroes. You hear that famous TIE fighter screech and it sends chills down your spine because it truly means something. As did a squad of stormtroopers in that show, because there's simply no way our heroes could ever stand against them if they came en masse. But in Ahsoka, again going along with what the comment brought up about tension, stormtroopers are simply fodder, no more, no less. It doesn't matter how cool they look, it doesn't matter if they are now called night troopers and have bandaged up armor and look intimidating, they still die just as easily as we've generally always seen in Star Wars, if we're being honest. Stormtroopers, until Andor, pretty much have never felt that capable. They've generally always been used as something that's pretty much just there, or to be used to make our heroes look, well, to make them look heroic. Not something to be feared and that is likely to really accomplish anything, especially a victory over our heroes in their plot armor. I mean, there is not a single person who knows anything about Star Wars, anyway, that really thought there was even a 1 in a million chance that one of them might kill Ezra, Sabine, or Ahsoka during this most recent episode. But in Andor, short of the titular character and a few others that we know literally cannot die because they're elsewhere or later on in the story, it felt like even a single stormtrooper could have easily killed any one of them at any time. And look, I'm not trying to say Ahsoka is trash because it relies too heavily on Star Wars and it has all this plot armor and all these things. For the most part, I'm enjoying it, and I do like that in many ways. It does kind of feel like something akin to classic or traditional Star Wars, you could say. I like that the show is embracing this and that it's using the lore and exploring the galaxy or another galaxy in new and interesting ways. I think, as I've been arguing a lot in recent videos, that people tend to overuse the term member berries nowadays, that it implies any use of previously known character or legacy character automatically qualifies as being bad when it doesn't. I mean, in this case, with the Ahsoka series, it makes sense to, say, bring in Anakin Skywalker because that character was a huge part of Ahsoka's life. Her whole story essentially revolved around him for years, for an entire show, that being the Clone Wars. So yeah, bring in Anakin and let's see her resolve the conflict within herself around him. That's perfectly fine. But I don't think that same sort of excuse works for not selling Thrawn more than they have. And of course, you could do some epic stuff in the finale, yet this is being recorded before that. But my point is that there's a fine line between making something more Star Wars-like and incorporating the lore or previous characters in good and intriguing ways, and then just using Star Wars like a crutch or something to prop up an otherwise pretty weak story just to get people to watch. And then there's of course doing what Andor did, and just using Star Wars as nothing more than a setting, one that doesn't purposely ignore the lore or anything like that, but doesn't sort of bend over backwards to incorporate it at every turn, or to make itself feel very Star Wars-like. All the while still actually doing quite a bit for Star Wars itself on a few different levels, again, like Andor did. And though, as I said, I'm enjoying Ahsoka, and I do appreciate something that isn't afraid to be a little overtly Star Wars, I don't think it would receive anywhere near as much praise as it is getting by some if it wasn't Star Wars. Hell, I don't think anyone would be talking about it at all if it wasn't Star Wars. And at the same time, I do understand why I've seen others out there say that there's this kind of no going back for them after Andor. That it sort of opened their eyes and they'd like to see Star Wars be handled that way a bit more often. And though I do think there's room for both styles or all sorts of styles in Star Wars, especially when you realize or keep in mind that, yeah, Star Wars is or maybe should be thought of more as a setting for different types of stories and different ways of telling stories, more so than considered like this genre that can be done only this one certain way. But anyway, yeah, I do think there's room for all sorts of styles in Star Wars. But that it should always be cautious about relying too heavily on the brand itself. I know this might sound a little strange, but I really don't think Star Wars itself should ever be the main attraction. That was, again, one of my big sort of takeaways or revelations after watching Andor. I think you can certainly use it more in some stories than others. It can be more of a highlight, you could say. But I absolutely think the individual story itself should always be the main attraction. And if it isn't, then I think we may have a problem on our hands. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Do you think Ahsoka would be considered a good show if it wasn't for the Star Wars brand, if it wasn't for the familiarity people already have with all this, or all that's associated with it? Or, of course, you can always just ask a question for a future lightning response video. Just start your comment off of Hey Thor and then ask away. Whatever you choose to do, though, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.